That's why I'm talking about China and other China news. That's very important to understand. When China got into the World Trade Association in 2001, it got in just weeks after 9/11. Remember, we've got to hate them commies. We don't like them commies, but we're going to do business. It got in 2 weeks after 9/11 when no one was paying attention. Do you know what the middle class in China was back then? I got it right here. 5%. 5%. Now the middle class in China, almost 35%. That's how China's taking over. The business of China is business, and it's being run by the government. They'll do anything they can to keep that government alive.
His quote is said here,
money flowing in.
Interestingly, both Russia and China publicize and promote their accumulation of gold and publicly refer to gold as strategic monetary asset. They make no secret of this, but on the flip side, the U.S. does the opposite and constantly downplays the strategic role of gold. Singapore's bullion star, precious metals expert Ronan Manley told RT in December. Says the U.S. claims to be the largest holder of gold with 8,134 tons, but according to Manley, the number is impossible to verify. He's quoted as saying the entire story around the U.S. gold reserves is opaque and secretive. There have never been a full independent audit of the U.S. gold reserves, and the custodians of the gold, the U.S. Mint and the Federal Reserve of New York, will not let anybody into the vaults to view the gold or to count it. So there, in and of itself, is the idea that, here we have Russia and China both openly and publicly accumulating all this gold, and it's labeled as being a strategic monetary asset. So strategic monetary asset leads me to believe that it's a strategy and it's going to be utilized in case something doesn't work out the way that, the Western world would prefer for it to work out. So that lets me know that there's something that's already been in the works for roughly the last 15 years that is in play as of now. And it's taking full effect now that Russia is supposedly passing in their gold holdings.
The only reason the Chinese economy is so large is because the U.S. buys all that stuff that China creates cheaply. As you're pointing out, eventually, though, that whole argument goes away, does it not? Because there is going to be a shift coming.
Well, China's economic growth is not thanks to our generosity in accepting all their output. It's their effort that produced it in the first place. It's Chinese factories. It's Chinese capital investment in Chinese labor that is growing the Chinese economy, not American consumption. I think, if anything, we're a drag on the Chinese economy. I think if China wasn't foolishly subsidizing American consumption, the Chinese would be enjoying falling domestic prices, and they would be buying all the goods that are turning out of Chinese factories, and their economy and their standard of living would be much stronger as a result.
Because that might be the case, do you think that China would then, at some point in the near future, decide to stop, as you use the word, subsidizing Americans with those cheap products?
Well, absolutely. In fact, that's why I think the Chinese have been accumulating so much gold, and why I think they continue to be big buyers of gold, is they are preparing to jettison the dollar as their principal reserve, and I think they're going to eliminate the peg. And again, when they do, that's going to be the birth of a new renaissance in China. You're going to really see China rise to a much greater degree, and that's going to be the sun setting on the American century. Because without China's support, we're going to have to finally deal with the problems that have been building up in our economy for years, but China has spared us having to deal with those problems.
Another major topic is China's economy and the growing use of its own currency in global trade.
Yeah, Beijing is in fact looking to introduce a new way to price oil as early as this year in their own currency. Up till now, the U.S. dollar has been the only currency with which large-scale purchases of oil were conducted, hence the term petro-dollar. But now it's the idea of the petro-yuan that's being introduced, which would, of course, mark a significant dent in the U.S. dollar's global dominance. Now, the move will allow China's trading partners to pay with either gold or to convert the yuan into gold, cutting out the the US dollar out of the question altogether. And frankly, it's a logical move for China because they're, of course, the world's largest oil importer. For example, just last year, China spent over 100 billion US dollars on oil. So in theory, if they manage to make those purchases in yuan in the future, that would mean a huge chunk of US change completely off the financial markets. And one can only wonder what sort of effect that will have. And of course, it's a rather ambitious undertaking, and there is some doubts that trading partners will get on board to make that possible. And of course, it goes without saying that after 4 decades of the US dollar priced oil, it's not a change that will happen overnight.
His quote is said here, interestingly, both Russia and China publicize and promote their accumulation of gold and publicly refer to gold as strategic monetary asset. They make no secret of this, but on the flip side, the U.S. does the opposite and constantly downplays the strategic role of gold. Singapore's bullion star precious metals expert Ronan Manley told RT in December. Says the U.S. claims to be the largest holder of gold with 8,134 tons, but according to Manley, the number is impossible to verify. He's quoted as saying the entire story around the U.S. gold reserves is opaque and secretive. There have never been a full independent audit of the U.S. gold reserves, and the custodians of the gold, the U.S. Mint and the Federal Reserve of New York, will not let anybody into the vaults to view the gold or to count it. So there, in and of itself, is the idea that, here we have Russia and China both openly and publicly accumulating all this gold, and it's labeled as being a strategic monetary asset. So strategic monetary asset leads me to believe that it's a strategy and it's going to be utilized in case something doesn't work out the way that, the Western world would prefer for it to work out. So that lets me know that there's something that's already been in the works for roughly the last 15 years that is in play as of now. And it's taking full effect now that Russia is supposedly passing in their gold holdings. So,
and among the countries you said might actually join China in this were Saudi Arabia. You said that just a couple of minutes ago. I mean, that might surprise a lot of people that they would be willing to go ahead with this.
Oh, yeah.
So
absolutely.
So how could they be able to do this and simply switch out of the US dollar? Do you think it's that simple for them?
Well, it's not going to be simple, but there's definitely a motivation for the Saudis to, they want to float Aramco, for example, because they need the money, because they're deeply in debt, and they're running out of cash, and they wanted to do an IPO of Aramco on either the London or the American exchange, but they were prevented from doing so from the legal actions of the 9/11 survivors, who rightly point to the Saudis as the cause of 9/11, the architects of 9/11, and they were allowed in America for those lawsuits to go forward. That's a pretty recent development. Only in the last year or so, lawsuits against Saudis for terrorism for 9/11 have been allowed to go forward. So now the Saudis are like, okay, if that's the way you feel, America, then we're going to take our business to China, Russia, Iran, So there's a huge split between the Saudi and America right now. The petro-dollar, which got started in 1971, that's coming to an end. The Saudis are doing all kinds of moves that beyond just killing people on 9/11, which is pretty aggressive, I think.
Max,
they're doing a lot of other moves.
We could talk a lot longer about this. It's a fascinating topic, but we've got to leave it there. We really appreciate your thoughts on this. That was
sure.
Max Kaiser. Thank you.
Here we have from RT, and it says, Russia overtakes China in gold reserves, race to end U.S. dollar dominance. The next one here is from The Trumpet, and it's as of last summer, but the title speaks for itself. Why is Russia buying so much gold? The next one here is from the Washington Times as of this last week, and it says, while U.S. piles up debt, Russians are hoarding gold. And the very last one here is from the United States Gold Bureau, and it's entitled The Real Story About Russia's Gold Holdings. So let's run through the very first one. And so Russia overtakes China in gold reserves race to end U.S. dollar dominance. So that in and of itself speaks volumes. It says the Central Bank of Russia boosted its holdings of gold by almost 20 metric tons last month, with reserves reaching 1,857 tons. It has increased its holdings every month since March of 2015. It says Russia is now among the top 5 gold holders after surpassing Russia, which reportedly holds 1,843 tons, which anyone who follows alternative media know that that number is very understated, extremely. It says over the last 15 years, Moscow and Beijing have been aggressively accumulating gold reserves to cut their dependence on the U.S. dollar.
By the end of the year, Beijing also plans to pay for oil using its own currency, undermining the supremacy of the US petrodollar on the energy market.